Here we are. Yeah, people are joining.
They are beautiful pictures.
Now, while I'm showing my screen, I can't see all of the information. It's disappeared. There we are. Got it. So I think we'll just give it a couple more minutes just to let people join. Keeping an eye on the number of participants. So do bear with us. This is the awkward silence that will be cut from the beginning of the recording. But we'll get through it. Right. I can still see people joining, so I'm just going to give it one more minute and then we'll get going.
Minutes always seem to take a long time when you're waiting online, don't they? Longest minute ever.
Absolutely. That's been about 30 seconds.
It's funny because when you have face-to-face meetings, you could easily start 5 minutes late and no one would mind. But
absolutely, yeah.
Oh,
just to say, three people have joined in the last 30 seconds, so I feel like that was worth doing. There's another one. Right. Okay. Right. I think we'll start then. So, welcome everyone this evening, and thank you very much for coming. There's just a couple of things I wanted to mention first of all, just for housekeeping. Firstly, there is a Q&A function on the webinar. So if you do have any questions for the panel, please put them in there. You can also introduce yourself in the chat if you'd like to. Name whatever you'd like to include, where you're tuning in from, things like that. And if you have, yeah, that's pretty much it for now. So I just want to also introduce National Mammal Week briefly. And it's a celebration of Britain's mammals, and we see it as an opportunity to raise awareness for the challenges that they face as well. So throughout this week, there's going to be a series of engaging events, some educational activities, and some community initiatives happening all over the country. So if you are interested in getting involved with any of that stuff, you can have a look on our website where we have all of the information ready to go. This year, the spotlight is on on the forgotten and the underrepresented mammals, such as species which are critically endangered, some which are extinct, invasive, urban, small ones, and anything that's under-recorded as well. And we'll be exploring the past and future of mammalogy as well, as we celebrate the rich diversity of both mammalian species, but also the individuals who dedicate their lives to studying them. And that can be our segue into introducing the panel. So I'll pass over to our host for this evening, Robin Grant.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Russ. So welcome everyone. I'm really pleased that you can join us today to hear about what it's like working in mammal research. So I'm your host tonight, so you won't hear much from me. I'll just be asking the questions, and we'll be hearing from our amazing panel rather instead. So I'm a reader at Manchester Metropolitan University, and I'm also editor-in-chief for Mammal Review, which is the Mammal Society journal. So if you are really enthused about mammal research, or you are already involved in mammal research, then do have a look through our journal, or feel free to kind of submit to our journal too, because we love to hear about all your research too. But what we're going to do tonight is we're going to hear from our amazing panel. So we have Kristy and Holly and Rachel and Beth, and these guys are just fantastic mammal researchers, and they do lots of different things. We're going to hear all about the jobs that they do, and also kind of their journey into these jobs, and then what's kind of maybe going to happen in the future. So to get underway, I wonder if each of you guys in turn could just let us know your full names, your official job titles, I guess, and then what that involves for mammal research. And so Kristy, maybe.
Hi everyone, I'm Kristy Adaway, and I am a PhD student at the University of Hull. And for my research, I'm looking at wildlife conservation, but from a multidisciplinary perspective. And I'm exploring the relationships between animal psychology, behavioural adaptability, human-wildlife conflict, and public attitudes towards nature. And this is all a part of the British Carnivore project, which is run by my PhD supervisor, Dr. Blake Morton. So my study species, well, my main focus is British carnivores.
Thank you very much, Kristy. It's amazing to hear about all this interdisciplinary stuff, and I'm sure we're going to talk about some of those methods later as well. Thank you.
Yes,
Holly.
Hi everyone, I'm Holly Hume. I'm a second year PhD researcher at Cardiff University. I'm studying otters as sentinels for synthetic chemical pollution in Europe and the UK. And currently my work's looking at cosmetic pollution and the potential health implications that this has on otter and buzzard species actually, but looking at not just their toxic and endocrine disrupting effects, but also how we can use otters for biomonitoring for pollution. This is part of the Cardiff University Otter Project, which is run by my main supervisor, Liz Chadwick. And it's, again, interdisciplinary, working as part of the Eco-Risk Centre for doctoral training, so a bit of ecotoxicology in there as well.
Fantastic, thank you. And Rachel?
Hi, yeah, I'm Rachel Lennon. I'm also a second year PhD researcher at the University of Glasgow. And my study species are cetaceans, so that's dolphins, whales, and porpoises. My main focus is trying to use strandings data, so when they get on the beach, to better understand health. These being the mammals that are in the ocean, they're more difficult to study than some, so strandings data, while sad, does offer a really unique opportunity to learn a lot more about them. So I'm kind of exploring the extent to which strandings data can tell us more about these amazing animals, and that's with the Scottish Marine Animal Stranding Scheme up in Scotland.
Fantastic, thank you. Okay.
Hey, so I'm Beth Smith, and I'm currently a postdoctoral research assistant at the Zoological Society of London. And I don't know if there's anyone in the audience who's not like of an academic background. That basically just means it's the job I have post doing a PhD, so postdoctorate. And what I'm working on is a project in collaboration with Natural England and the UK Squirrel Accord. And it's a 2-year project to try and come up with a recovery plan for red squirrels across England. And we're doing that using decision science and what we call structured decision making, which I think I'll leave it at that because that might go into some of the other questions about what on earth is that in terms of methodology. So it's red squirrels.
That's really great. Thank you so much. I guess what I'm seeing at the moment is, there's lots of interdisciplinary, lots of different methods. And then also these massive teams that you're working on. So these big collaborations that you have. So my first question maybe now is thinking about how you got to to where you are, so the journey that you've been on, and whether you've met any challenges along the way as well. So yeah, Kristy.
Hi. Yeah, so I started this position after doing an internship with the British Carnivore Project, which is a project run by my PhD supervisor. So I was at the University of Hull. I finished my undergraduate degree in marine biology, and then I started on the British Carnivore Project internship, and that's where I learned all of the skills needed for this role. And yeah, so, and whilst doing the internship, I realised that there was a hole in conservation really for psychological research, so animal psychology and human psychology. And it's just gone from there, and that's now what I'm focusing on in my PhD.
Perfect, thank you. And Holly.
So I didn't actually have a massive academic background prior to becoming sort of a PhD candidate. After graduating from geography undergrad in 2017, that was, I went into industry, and don't hate me, but did work for a water company and a bit of consultancy. So I was an environmental advisor for a couple of years and did things like pollution control and sampling. And that's how I really developed my interest for pollution science. So when I knew I wanted to try a new challenge and get into something a bit more meaningful with research, that's when I decided to look into a PhD. And this one was perfect for my skill set. But Robin, as you mentioned, some of the challenges, I think that's where I struggled coming in without perhaps more of like an internship or a master's or something like that. There was a lot of new things to learn coming into academia that I hadn't been aware of. And learning statistics, script, coding from scratch, that was a big challenge, and getting back into sort of research life with the way that things work at university, I struggled with, but got there in the end.
Thank you. Rachel?
Yeah, so I started doing an undergrad in biology at York, and I was really into neuroscience then, so I wanted to maybe be a psychologist or something. And when I graduated, I then started as a healthcare assistant, and realized very quickly that that wasn't for me at all. But whilst I was in there, on the ward, there was a magazine, like an old National Geographic magazine, and it was all about marine animals and the ocean, and I was reading it, and this was kind of during lockdown, so then I was attending webinars, or the webinars that we had, like this one, and just getting more and more into it. And then I kind of thought, well, I've got to go for it. And I decided to do a master's in marine vertebrate ecology and conservation, and just absolutely loved it, fell in love with it. And it was a really heavily skills-based project, master's, so got loads of skills in marine biology and loads of great experiences, and kind of from that networking, from that master's, got in contact with the Scottish Marine Animal Stranding Scheme and my supervisor, and then got onto this PhD. So it was kind of a opportunistic thing, but yeah, I just kind of followed that interest that was sparked by just reading a magazine.
That's fantastic. It's nice to hear that it can be anything, can't it? It can be an internship. It could just be reading something.
Yeah, definitely.
Beth, how about you?
So I've had a relatively straightforward academic progression. So started out undergrad natural sciences, and then took, what did I do, a year out working on different research projects. So I just tried. So basically, for me, one of my challenges has always been what am I actually interested in? Because I just love the environment, natural world, wildlife, and always struggled to pin down exactly what it was. So I spent a year, one, just saving up some money and working, but also working on different. So I did a marine project, I did a large carnivore project, and just tried to apply to different positions that would give me different skill sets. But then I did a master's. I did a master's by research, so I had 2 research projects again, so I could decide, try 2 different things. One was very lab-based, environmental DNA. One was out in the field doing large carnivore work again. so camera trapping, realised that actually it was a bit helpful, like both things. Don't mind being in the lab, also love being in the field. Then I worked at the Mammal Society for 1.5 years, which is like, yeah, mammals. I'm a mammal person. That led into me doing, not directly, but I ended up doing a PhD after that on domestic dogs, but from a wildlife perspective and human wildlife conflict. And yeah, again, just I feel like some people, you know, have a very sort of natural progression from one area to the next. It's the people you're working with. For me, I was finishing up my PhD and I saw this postdoc advertised and I applied for it. And I guess with that, having that background from the Mammal Society, working on lots of different mammals across the UK, different projects, different people, different methods, I found myself working on red squirrels and being back in the UK working on UK species, which is really nice. Because one of the things I find as well is just moving around and traveling a lot. As great as those opportunities are, I did find living out of a suitcase for years pretty challenging, just never having a base, just constantly up to the next country, to the next project. Is fun for a while, but then you start getting a bit older and you're like, oh, it'd be kind of nice to just like have somewhere to call home.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's reassuring to see that you guys, it's reassuring to me, definitely, that you know, you never had this big plan of where you're going to be for research at the end, that it is this kind of trialing, exploration kind of journey that takes you there, that you kind of try stuff and say, oh, you fancy that, then you go that way and it might take you another way. And I think there's probably for our audience as well, that's kind of reassuring, because you don't usually have a full plan, do you, on the way. So the other thing we kind of mentioned a little bit before is that, I mean, my goodness, you guys are representing a lot of different methods. So we've got kind of from social science to kind of lab ecotoxicology. And so I wondered kind of what methods do you use and what experience did you have in those exact methods kind of before you came to your current post? Kristy, you kind of said you did an internship before that was quite well aligned, wasn't it?
Yes, so my internship was basically the exact same as what I'm doing now, but now I'm doing and then some. So yeah, all of the experience I got from the internship is what I'm now applying to my PhD, which is really nice and, as you say, reassuring for the people, because you don't have to have done it years. It was just a 1-year internship and I learned so much in it. Yeah, so some of the methods that I'm using, so it's a combination of different methods from animal behaviour and human psychology, which psychology isn't my background, so that's still new to me today. So, for example, we was recently looking at the impact of urbanisation on boldness and problem solving in red foxes. And to do that, we gave them puzzle feeders, which were designed to measure those behaviours. And for which we used trail cameras so that we could monitor their natural behaviour when we wasn't present. So all of that was completely new to me. I'd not really used trail cameras before. And yeah, and for the public attitudes towards carnivores, I'll be using a combination of things like online questionnaires and interviews, which I'm hoping to start later this year. So that's, again, still going to be new to me. So we're always learning.
Yeah, and quite experimental then as well. So the fact you are, you know, like using puzzle feeders and kind of getting really like changing things up.
Yes, yeah, learning as we go. Yeah. Yeah.
Aren't we always? Yeah.
Yeah, always.
And Holly.
So I had some of the skills I had from before, but for context, we receive otters at the Otter Project, predominantly from roadkill, and post-mortems are conducted in the lab. That's something I had never done before, was a post-mortem, apart from in, I think, GCSE A-level biology or something like that, much smaller scale. So that was a really cool learning experience to get involved with that. And then my specific work uses the livers, which get sent to an analytical lab, which I'm hoping to get involved with a bit further down the line, but haven't had experience in that before. But the bulk of my work is data wrangling and statistical analysis. And I think that's where my industry experience really came in, where I did develop lots of spreadsheets and lots of methods for assessing data and being able to write reports on it. And I think that's really been helpful for my current work, which has been a lot of data wrangling, tidying up data that comes back for thousands of chemicals that we get found in otter livers. So some experience I had, some I didn't, but as Kristy said, it's sort of always learning on the job. And I think applying to a PhD, you don't really know what methods you will use until even a year down the line. So, you know, I didn't sign up to it knowing, oh, I've not got experience in this, or I have experience in all of this, and then it's a big shocker. It is a learning on the job, I think, for most people that I speak to.
Yeah, and I think mentioning the data analysis, actually data wrangling also
Yeah.
really useful, because it's probably something that you guys all have in common too, isn't it? That we all have to do some stats and arrange our numbers, and yeah. Thank you. Rachel.
Yeah, I think actually mine's quite surprisingly similar to Holly, in that a bulk of my work is computational and a lot of statistics and a lot of analysis there. And I did have quite a bit of experience in that prior, both in my undergraduate and then in my master's, which was really helpful. But I would also say that still I'm learning so much to do with my statistical analysis. I mean, there's always something new to learn, right? So there's still this massive learning curve. And I think oftentimes statistics is really intimidating and people kind of get quite scared of it. But I've always found that once you actually get in it, you realize that it's not scary, and it's just on the outside that it looks really intimidating. And then you start doing it and you're like, oh, okay, like, no, I can do this. And it's almost just like that initial leap into it that's quite difficult to make. But once you're in there, you can kind of, like anything, learn on the job. And it is one of those things that you just get your head around. So that was kind of more my comfort area. But again, similarly to Holly, a big part of my field work is postmortems, and I had never done that before. And that was a big learning on the job experience. When I first started, my first day on my PhD, I went and joined a postmortem, and before they'd even got the knives out, I was on the floor and had fainted. So it is a bit of a learning curve. And then I think I maybe did 5 or 6 postmortems in the lab. And then we had a mass stranding of 55 pilot whales, and we went to the beach, and it was a whole week of all of these animals that you just had to get through as quickly as possible. And there was kind of like a time element to it, so it was quite stressful, but it was this huge learning experience and hugely valuable in the terms of data. So I think that, like Kristy said, it was learning on the job, and all of these opportunities come up for you to learn these skills. And I think it's the main thing that you need is just that willingness to get into it and to say, like, okay, this is my opportunity. I'm going to try and absorb as much as I can. And then, yeah, you just go from there and you kind of learn what you need to learn and get on with it.
Yeah, and actually both those things are quite overwhelming, aren't they? Statistics and having to do something like a postmortem. It's quite tough. What was your first species?
It was a harbour porpoise. It was so embarrassing because it was this really fresh, like didn't really stink at all, this little chubby harbour porpoise. And I think, yeah, to be fair to myself, there was also, I think, a horse hung from the ceiling with all of its guts out, and there was lots of things going on, but all I had to do was focus on this porpoise. But no, I just couldn't keep it together. But you know, you live and you learn.
Yes, definitely. Now you're there, now you're away with everything. Yeah.
Exactly.
Thank you. And Beth?
So I'm in a slightly different position, I guess, where most of the methods that I used previously were very hands-on and field work based. So a lot of wildlife monitoring, camera traps, bioacoustics, GPS tracking, the sort of usual things that people think about when they think about studying mammals. Whereas now I mostly sit in this chair at my desk all day, every day. And so as I said at the beginning, I'm using decision science to come up with a recovery plan for red squirrels in England. And what that basically means is we take a very structured approach to helping people make like hard decisions, and most conservation decisions are hard to make. So you have lots of different people with lots of different values and belief systems. And what we do is we get all of those people together. And usually when people start tackling a conservation problem, they start with the available actions, the management things that you can do. And that really narrows the scope of like the potential solutions and can exclude people from those conversations. Whereas if you start with everybody in the room and with what everybody values and what people want, and then you start thinking, well, what actions can we take to achieve everything that we want? You can kind of broaden the scope of your problem. And then what we do is we estimate all the consequences of the different actions that we can take. So now I do lots of stats. So I do lots of working with people and population modelling. So essentially, if we do X, Y, Z in this place, and then we do A, B, C in another place, and we mismatch all these things together, like what are the outcomes for all of the things we care about, to do with red squirrels, and also, you know, public support, animal welfare, lots of different things. So putting everything into one project, so that you can see the outcomes of all of that in one place to help Natural England make a decision about what to do that best suits everybody. And it's not necessarily about compromise, but it's about making sure that everybody feels heard and that you're very transparent in the decision that you make and why you've made it. And then also, funnily enough, I had none of these skills from my PhD. So again, PhD was very fieldwork based. So even once you get to postdoc level, it's quite refreshing to know you still learn, and you can still do things that you didn't like focus on in your PhD or previously. You don't have to be like, oh, I did that, so that's the only thing that I can do. So I had no background in decision analysis, so I've learned that since I started. And hilariously had no experience in population modelling. So done a lot of stats in the past, but just not population modelling. So also doing all of that now as well.
And how has it been moving from like the field into quite a person focused role, like a people focused role?
Interesting. I really like it. I think partly working at the Mammal Society before, when I was data and information officer, I dealt with the public a lot. And during my PhD, I did, you know, I had a social element to it. I was working with shepherds out in Romania and game managers. So I was doing a lot of that interfacing, and it's human wildlife conflict. So you're dealing with people who have lots of different views. So I guess that side of it, I've sort of transitioned in now. Yeah, like, don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with working with people, but I do miss the field. I do miss doing field work, but that's more to do with not liking sitting at my desk all the time rather than not enjoying working with people.
Thank you.
My body is complaining about being sat at my desk all the time.
Let me get out and about.
Yeah,
that's fantastic. And then I guess the other thing is that you guys have all quite different species that you're working on. So I guess my next question is kind of how do you select a good species to work with? Like why is your species kind of so important for the work that you do? So Kristy, what do you think?
Okay, so I think carnivores in general are great for my type of research because they're understudied in behavioural research. Sorry, they're well studied in behavioural research, but understudied in psychological research. And carnivores also bring out mixed emotions in people, which is great for looking at human-wildlife conflicts. So the red fox is my main focus at the moment, and they're extremely adaptable. They're one of the most widespread carnivores in the world. So they're a great species for comparisons in adaptability with other species. They're also quite common, so they're easy to find, easy to monitor. And they're found in all different kinds of habitat types, so urban areas, rural areas, and it makes them ideal for understanding how environmental pressures leads to population differences in animal behaviour and psychology. And for the human psychology side of things, foxes are culturally intertwined in our society. Some people like them, some people loathe them. So that makes them the perfect species for investigating human-wildlife conflicts and public perceptions.
Perfect. And do you really see that range of feelings from the public?
Yes, definitely. Wide range of feelings from the public. Yeah. Yeah, not so much in between, either love or hate, I think. Yeah.
Depending where the people live, Like, I don't know, are urban people more?
That's something I'll hopefully be able to tell you more about in a while. But yes, I think there's definitely going to be differences in different areas. Yes, and also to people's backgrounds, I suppose. People that have grown up, I suppose, fox hunting and things might differ from people that have grown up feeding foxes in their garden. So yeah, I'll hopefully be able to tell you more though, probably in about a year's time. So
Exciting. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Holly, why otters?
So, for those who don't know, Eurasian otters or lutra are the only native species we've got in the wild here in the UK. They underwent a population bottleneck after a sort of decline, a crash in numbers around the 70s. That was due to chemical DDT blamed for that. So now that they're recovering, thanks to conservation methods, they're actually very widespread opportunistic apex predators. So what that means is they're eating a wide range of food for most of the UK. So collecting them, we're able to see sort of the impacts of spatial and temporal trends now that they've been around for decades back in the UK. And that bioaccumulation, we're able to detect in otter livers with them at the top of the food chain and see chemicals coming up in livers that we might not be able to detect and sort of lower level biota or even water or sort of sediment samples and things like that. I guess on a public facing front, they're great to study because everyone likes seeing a sort of cuddly, fluffy otter. I think most people are surprised to know that there's more than likely an otter in their local river. And there's lots of ways to get engaged with spotting signs, and most people are happy to know if there's otters there, indicating perhaps good water quality and things like that. So yeah, it's good for engagement and also good for research. And there's loads we can do with otters for not just chemical studies, but their health to help their conservation and lots of other things really as well, DNA analysis and things like that.
Listen, where do your otters come from? Like across, I mean, they're from the whole of the UK, but is it members of the public that
so members of the public hopefully report dead otters, and that goes through the Environment Agency in England, International Otter Survival Fund in Scotland, and here in Wales it's the Natural Resources Wales, and hopefully they report to them and then they bring us the dead otters, which is sad, but we do have massive archives of them, which is very handy for research. So if anyone listening ever comes across one, please do report it. It's really beneficial to not just our project, but things like the Road Lab and other places that collect such data.
Thank you. And Rachel, you're also making use of specimens that people probably ring up about as well, I guess. So cetaceans, yeah.
I think again probably quite similar to Holly. They're very charismatic species. Obviously everybody loves a whale or a dolphin, so they're really people are really interested in them. So there's a lot of societal push both to understand and protect the species, and that makes it quite easy when you're trying to disseminate some information that you've got. People tend to be a lot more interested in what you have to say sometimes when it's being carried by this really charismatic species, and people tend to be really quite strongly passionate about these animals. So it was like in the 80s when they had the Save the Whale movement that precipitated the moratorium on whaling. So they are really powerful for actually causing some kind of change. So when it comes to policy, that's really important and really valuable. And I think additionally to that, they're obviously really important for themselves, but as top predators, they're sentinels for the rest of the ocean. So when we're looking at those animals, we're also looking at anything lower in the trophic level that they're consuming. And when that comes to the ocean, that's quite difficult to monitor in comparison to terrestrial environments. If we can use them to really monitor ocean health in general, then that's really valuable. And again, if you're carrying protection for lower level species with the umbrella of a nice whale, then that's really valuable as well. So yeah, there's kind of that duality of they're both ecologically important and societally important, and they can, yeah, precipitate a lot of change.
Yeah, it seems kind of quite important, doesn't it? Yeah, to have the public on board with. We're quite lucky, aren't we, working in mammals, that the public is usually on board with our
Yes, definitely.
apart from maybe some foxes somewhere.
Yeah.
Beth.
Yeah, I think just as a point, I would argue that the public are not always on board, which is partly leads into why we need decision science for the species that I work with, is because there's lots of different things that factor in and people have lots of different opinions about how to conserve a species and whether that impacts on invasive species and how you control or manage those species. So we work on red squirrels, because they are endangered. And so it's a very applied conservation project. It's nothing behavioural. It's like that we literally work on them because they're going extinct, and it's not looking very good for them without strong management interventions, essentially. So we need to decide what those management interventions are without isolating members of the public who feel strongly about certain management methods. So I mean, the numbers are never exact, but I think the estimates are that there used to be about 3.5 million red squirrels in the UK. I think that's now at like 300,000, compared to like almost 3 million grey squirrels that we currently have. So the reason that red squirrels are going extinct, I mean, it's very much a sort of multifaceted problem, but it's largely due to invasive grey squirrels. So they transmit a disease called squirrel pox to red squirrels, which is not doesn't affect grey squirrels, but is basically 100% fatal to red squirrels. Once they get it, they die. They also outcompete red squirrels, so they're better at caching food and just generally can live at higher densities in forests than red squirrels can. So even without the disease, you have this competitive interaction. There's also some habitat stuff going on in there, and like reintroductions of pine martens that affect both grey squirrels and red squirrels because they prey on squirrels. So we've got disease, predation, competition, and then what's currently happening around the UK is a lot of grey squirrel management to try and help red squirrel populations recover. And killing any animal has its pros and cons, if we put it that way. Some people say it's fine if you're doing it for the purpose of another species. Some people say, what right does that species have to live over another one? There are different ways that people are doing it. We've got, basically, you can reduce grey squirrel populations at the minute only really through culling, and there are many different methods to do that, which each method has its own stuff attached to it. And then also there's development of fertility control. So basically you can see this is like a huge issue, and it's wide ranging across the UK. We're focused very much on England, but this is why we have to take all of these different things into account and apply decision science to make sense of it somehow. Yeah, so that's
how do you get the public on board perhaps for some of these decisions that you have to make? Something like, say, if you're managing grey squirrel populations, that must be quite a contentious thing, but if that's for the best, they've weighed everything up and that's the best way to go, yeah, it's hard.
I mean, for us, to be honest, with the process that we go through, we're not responsible for trying to change public opinion. That's not our job. Our job at the minute is to assess public opinion and assess what the change in public opinion might be if you put in certain interventions. So like when we talk about the interventions and the actions that we can do, it's not necessarily just things that affect red squirrels or grey squirrels, but it might be like putting out a large-scale comms campaign and running specific, having sort of red squirrel ambassadors. So we're very much looking at what is the public support for these different actions and how does that influence a decision, not how do we change public support, because there will be some people who you can't sway either way. And thinking on how, depending on how you look at it, like it's not up to you to swing their opinion either way. They hold those opinions for a reason, and that's fine.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I guess this kind of leads us quite well onto our next question, which is kind of and definitely you've been helping, thanks Beth, is thinking like, if you wanted to link your research that you're doing now directly into conservation for your species, and we heard how you kind of work in these big collaborative groups, lots of partners, kind of what are the steps that you might have to take to help in the conservation for your species, kind of using your research? And I know obviously some of your research is kind of maybe more behavioural or more kind of fundamental and less of this kind of applied conservation, but it'd be lovely to hear your thoughts anyway. So Kristy, what do you think?
Yes, so animal psychology is quite understudied in relation to wildlife conservation, with the exception of birds and primates. So gaining a deeper understanding of how species may behaviourally adapt to global challenges would be beneficial for any species. So if we can work out kind of methods for one species and then apply it to all species, it's not something that's really included in wildlife conservation at the moment, is their behaviour. As for the human-wildlife conflict aspect, that's a major factor that can impact wildlife conservation. So if people don't support all of the species in an environment, it can hinder conservation efforts. And many of the reasons why human-wildlife conflict occur is because of myths and things that surround certain species. So I'm looking at real versus perceived conflict as part of my thesis, and whether dispelling some of the misconceptions of foxes in particular could gain support for the species. And then that again could be applied to other species, because carnivores in general just get quite a bad reputation from people. So it could also be applied to species that do actually need conservation efforts more than foxes do. I mean, they don't really need conservation efforts at the moment, but then for the public attitudes towards nature, that's a major factor that could also hinder conservation efforts. So understanding whether and how people's views could be changed could be really beneficial again for conservation efforts. So
thank you. What are some of the misconceptions about foxes, or what's kind of the craziest one you've maybe heard?
I can't say for sure yet whether it is a misconception, but I think one thing that we hear quite a lot is about foxes raiding bins. And I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but I don't believe it happens quite as much as people make it out to. I know I've heard in London that it can be quite an issue. I think it really depends on what type of bin, and I think it's more of a person problem. I mean, they're not pushing over fully sized wheeler bins, and well, I don't think. But yeah, so just misconceptions like that. I think if people are going to leave litter around and rubbish bags around full with food, we can't blame species for going in them. But I think people saying that foxes raiding bins is a bit of a misconception in general. Yeah.
Yeah. Holly.
So I think the steps that my thesis relates to is maybe more policy driven to aid conservation. As I mentioned before, otters had their population crash due to chemicals, and thanks to the banning of some pesticides, we do start to see those numbers return. And I think that's the main thing that I'm trying to prove, is that otters can be used as sentinels to show the state of our watercourses. And I think my small steps of quantifying some chemicals or showing evidence that some chemicals have appeared in otter livers, reporting that for the first time in the UK, really helps to drive home that we do need to have better monitoring strategies in order to control substances which might be toxic, not just to mammals, but to humans as well. And I think, although I like to say, oh, my research is going to change policy, I think it is about working with those stakeholders, and I'm lucky to have quite a wide supervisory team from a range of different organisations that can really help drive that message of chemicals coming up in high abundances or high concentrations, and perhaps that they do need to be controlled in order to preserve otter conservation and otter populations in the UK, if we don't want to see another crash like we did before.
And I guess part of that is having these really long-term projects, isn't it? So you can monitor these changes over time and respond to something or see how things recover as well. Yeah,
definitely. And it's part of the Otter project. We've had multiple PhD students and placement year students and final year project students that are all looking at a range of different chemicals and different things impacting otter survival numbers. So yeah, it is about longevity, and I'm picking up off past PhD students' research, and I'm sure there'll be ones to pick up mine hopefully afterwards and continue on. So I think you're right about that longevity of monitoring.
Rachel?
Yeah, I think again, quite similar to Holly. My PhD is also focused on trying to quantify some of those effects and use that as what you bring for policy change. So I'm trying to assess health of cetaceans and use that to then quantify the effect that different anthropogenic stresses are having on them, so that then you can kind of go forward and say, okay, this event at this time in the year is having this effect on this individual. And the hope with that is that, so the main kind of issue that I'm looking at is some of the effects from the industrial action in the ocean. So in the North Sea, there's huge developments of wind farms and turbines and things, and the noise impact that has on a lot of cetaceans is quite severe. But that is more so at certain times of the year when perhaps they're more vulnerable. So things like porpoises, they have calving seasons in the spring or in the early summer, and they're more vulnerable at that point just because they're expending energy on other things. So if we can then quantify what that effect of the stressor is, that noise pollution or that contaminant burden or what have you, and say when we need to try and reduce that, the idea is that then you can present that to policymakers or decision makers or whoever and kind of say, reducing this impact at this time will have the biggest effect. And I think it's unrealistic to expect these activities to just stop completely, but trying to identify when the impact is going to be the biggest and when we the areas that maybe realistically you can implement some change. So if it's just a matter of shifting some work by several months, and that's actually going to have this huge effect on the survivability of species, then trying to kind of implement some of that is the focus of what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, and I guess that does need a lot of very detailed data, doesn't it, to tease apart these very precise questions.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think like you were saying just before, that it's that longevity of the data. So the SMAS data set is, I think, from 1992, so over 30 years of data. And the quality of that has changed with time, but you do still have this amazing data set that's got this huge abundance of data that you can really start to see trends and shifts in some of the baselines. And as more human activity is coming to our oceans, you can start to see changes in health. Over the past 30 years, there's been a discernible decline in body condition of these animals. And when you have that baseline or that assessment from 30 years ago, you can get a better idea of how damaging perhaps some of these activities have been. As the whole shifting baseline syndrome, if you can have a little bit of an idea of what that old baseline was, then it's helpful. And 30 years, I'm sure there was still a lot of impact then, but I think having longevity is really valuable when it comes to analysing these animals.
Thank you. Yes. Beth?
I think mine's a very straightforward answer because it's a very applied conservation project. So at the end of my project, by the summer of next year, we will have a big report and a big document, and we should have, I say we, I'm not the decision maker, but the decision makers involved in the project will hopefully have come to a decision about what they want to do, and that towards red squirrel recovery to implement over the next, say, 25 years. And then we'll hopefully do that. And hopefully we'll see more red squirrels across England. So yeah, pretty straightforward answer.
Perfect. I wonder, because we've got some questions in the chat, whether I might move on to the questions in the chat and then do panelists just kind of free-for-all answer when I pose a question? See, Robert, fight for answering, but we won't. So Hope says in the chat, because obviously we're all here from quite academic backgrounds, either working on PhDs or already finished. Are there alternative routes into mammalogy or or mammal research that aren't as academic as our roots, maybe?
I think definitely, at least in what my research, a lot of the data comes from citizen science. Well, all of the data basically comes from citizen science, and also working with NGOs. So we work a lot with the whale and dolphin conservation. So it's not, a lot of it isn't just academics. We also work with fishermen. We also, yeah, a huge part is also just, not just, but citizen scientists. So just people who are interested and passionate and get involved with some of like the charities and support in any way that they can. So a lot of our strandings are helped by volunteers. So it's not just that academic input, it's also just if you're interested and you want to get involved, then you can. And I think highlighting how valuable that is. So all of that data and all of the analysis that we're doing honestly would not be possible without the input of citizen science and volunteers helping, because, you know, especially in Scotland, it's over 17,000 kilometers of coastline. You know, it's massive coastline. Having people who can actually go out and look at the animal and collect the data is so valuable, and just underpins the entirety of the data set, and then all of this subsequent analysis and input. So I think that there's, you know, that's maybe the element that gets pushed sometimes, but there's all of these different inputs that are actually creating the data. And I think really highlighting those different avenues is really important, and there are so many. So yeah, there's not just the academic route that you can take.
Yeah, I think there's also quite a lot of scope for different jobs as well. So not necessarily just doing citizen science and volunteering, but actually, you know, obviously most of us are sat here now in an academic position like PhD or postdoc, but actually you can work with mammals if you're an ecologist. So I remember like not even realizing that ecology, like you could be an ecologist. I didn't know that was a job when I was at university. It was only like during my master's. I was like, oh, like people like work with mammals this way as well. And like, you know, I worked at the Mammal Society. It's not necessarily like an academic route, it's an NGO. There are lots of NGOs in the UK that you can work with on mammals. There's also a lot of people who think overlook government. Maybe it's not the, like, people don't think of it as the most fun place to work, but like Natural England and like DEFRA do a lot of work. APHA, everything that we do on race growth fertility control, we are talking to people at APHA, that's government sort of organisation. So there's also government as well. And I'm sure other people have more insight as well.
Thank you. Yes. And also as well, thinking about kind of these experiences you can pick up, what did you guys think was the kind of most important factor that you had on your CV, or the most important thing that you did to get into the current role that you have now?
I actually think, oh, sorry.
No, you're fine. Sorry, go.
Outside of CV, I actually think what did myself justice was enthusiasm. I think a lot of ecologists, and I really wanted to work with mammals, and I was excited to. And I think that's something that it's tough because it comes across in interview, but not necessarily on a CV. And I think that's something about perhaps reaching out to people ahead of time to show your enthusiasm really goes a long way. There's people that have volunteered for the Otter Project that they've shown their enthusiasm that way, rather than what's written down on a piece of paper where someone can't judge what's going on so much. Yeah, I don't know if anyone has some CV tips instead.
No, I think what helped me get my position, well, my position for the PhD researcher position was probably my internship, and my undergraduate degree would have helped with my good grades and things, but I think without doing the internship, and because I'm in the same, I have the same supervisory team as the internship, as you said, with enthusiasm, I think just the person that you come across as, so whether that be in an interview or in an internship, I think that can really help with you getting a position, probably not as a PhD if you've not got any other university experience, but just volunteering at organisations that you would like to work for, been enthusiastic, been someone that will just get on and get done. I think that is all just great things that would help you go into a paid position with them. But yeah, sorry, again, that's not very CV related.
Well, I guess if you can put those things on your CV and demonstrate that you've done that stuff outside of university or your studies, and that you actually are passionate about these things, that you volunteered your time. And I kind of hate always saying, oh, volunteering, because not everybody can afford to volunteer for things, whether that's even after school. Like, you know, we're not talking about big, large-scale project volunteering, but I think having ways to demonstrate that you're passionate on your CV. For me, I did, like when I was doing my master's, I also participated in the Mammal Society's University Mammal Challenge. And then as I was finishing my master's, a job opened up at the Mammal Society. And that helped me very, very clearly demonstrate that I am interested in mammals and I'm interested in your society. And I have interacted with this organization at quite an intimate kind of level. And like, I do like this stuff, please hire me. So I think like having those experiences to put on your CV is super helpful. But also just to another one for if you get to the point of interview, I know I partly got my current postdoc because they said I was enthusiastic and very friendly at interview, and I have to work with people. So being friendly and coming across as enthusiastic is very helpful.
Yeah, definitely good tips. We have Joe on the chat, and they're 12 and would really like to be involved as a field researcher with wolves. And they were asking kind of, what did you study? So I guess we think maybe A-levels and where and what you studied for your undergrad maybe as well. Kristy, shall we go?
Yeah, so mine wasn't the usual approach, I guess. After leaving school, instead of doing A-levels, I did MVQs that wasn't relevant to university. And then I came to university quite late, so I did what they called an access course, which gives you the same grades as A-levels would. So I did that later. It was just a year course that I could do part-time whilst I was working. And then for my undergraduate, I took marine biology, which is quite different from my PhD. There's still some skills that I learned that was relevant, lots of information about conservation and things, but it wasn't the most direct approach I could have took. And yeah, and then from the internship, I did marine biology undergrad. I didn't do a master's. I did the year's internship, which gave me all the skills to do what I wanted to do for my PhD. So
thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Kristy. Holly?
So yeah, after GCSEs, I was never underestimate geography, I think, for studying mammals. Everyone always says geography is such a dust, but I really enjoyed it, and that was the field work that gave me the skills. I also had some field work in biology, but A-level I started with maths, chemistry, geography and biology. I was rubbish at maths and chemistry, so had to drop those and ended up taking art. So I just think if you're getting the grades, just make sure you've got something that's going to get you onto the uni course that you want. Mine was again geography course for university, so less strict than some biology courses I know, perhaps lower grades and things like that. But my advice is to maybe just go with some things that you enjoy as well, because you don't know what path you might want to go on. I originally wanted to be a vet, so that was a doctor or something in the medical field. So that was what drove my choices, and then things changed as I discovered what I enjoyed more, and also what I was good at. So I had to be a bit real with myself then.
Good tip. Thank you. And Rachel, we heard that you kind of changed track as well, didn't you?
Yeah. I mean, I think I didn't actually do my school in England. I did it in Switzerland, so I didn't do A-levels. I did APs, which is basically just the equivalent. But yeah, mine was also quite broad. I think I can't remember who said this at the start, but I think it was Beth, that getting to do like lots of different things and tried lots of different things. And so that's why I picked biology as well, because I kind of knew that I was interested in biology, but maybe not what specific part of it. And doing that allowed me to try all of these different avenues. And you have modules from microbiology to marine biology and managed to, get a little snippet of each and every one. And then I tried to go down the more psychology route and figured out that wasn't what I wanted. But because I had that broader biology background, it then made it easier to, I guess, adjust my CV to what I then wanted. So, highlighting that psychology side when I wanted to get into that, and then highlighting some of the marine courses that I had done when I wanted to go down the marine route. And I think also similarly, doing, yes, you can't always volunteer, and I worked when I did my undergrad, so there wasn't loads of time for volunteering, but taking those opportunities when they come up, sometimes it was, this afternoon, if you want to, we're going to do this, and kind of taking up those more non-compulsory options, and you never know what you can then use later down the line. So I think whenever you do have opportunities that come up, grabbing those, and you don't know where it's going to lead. So I think just always being open to things if you can be.
Thank you, Rachel. Beth?
So I am a wolf researcher. I know I talked about squirrels for the most part, but a lot of my research has actually been on wolves. I just got back from Yellowstone in January doing some cool bioacoustic wolf research. So I listened to wolves howling out in the forest, and we put microphones onto trees in the forest, and then when we hear wolves howling, that's picked up on the microphones, and we can tell from the difference in time that the same howl arrives at different microphones. We can basically, like a phone satellite, like a phone pinging off different satellites, we can triangulate, or what we call multilaterate, where that sound is coming from, and that helps us study where wolves are and behavior. Lots of different cool things. So my biggest thing is, if you want to work with wolves, one, feel free to drop me an email and I can talk to you, and I can probably set you up with some things. But also, I also wanted to work with wolves from being super, super young. So I loved dogs, and for me, wolves were just an extension of dogs. And I had family in Canada, and got to go when I was pretty little, and hear wolves howling, and was just obsessed forever. Still am. So I saw that message, I was like, yes, fellow wolf person. But basically, you just keep pushing for it. It's something that is quite hard to break into, and there aren't that many positions, and especially from the UK. Maybe in a few years' time, by the time you want to be a researcher, there might be more things to do on wolves in the UK. But for now, you very much have to work abroad. So I've worked on wolves in Finland, the US, Canada, and Romania. There's nothing to do in the UK, so you have to be willing to travel and move and go to other places. But you got to find, especially when you start thinking about universities. It was absolutely not on my radar. I guess I got lucky. I was not thinking this far ahead when I was 17. But if you can find university where there are researchers already doing wolf research, or at least large carnivore research, then you have a good opportunity from undergraduate to be involved in that research. So I did my undergraduate project on wolf howling, and it's just sort of kept going. And then my PhD was on wolves and bears in Romania, and how those interact with livestock guarding dogs and camera trapping, lots of cool stuff like that. So was my master's. So you can kind of be strategic from a young age, but it's not necessarily what your brain is thinking about at the time. But in general, if you would like some opportunities or to talk about it more, then I'm very, very happy to talk about wolf research, because I love wolves.
Thank you, Beth. That's so helpful. I've just got a bit of an eye on the time, and I just wonder, we've kind of been thinking about kind of your guys' paths, and then your what you do now. I was wondering what you think about the future, so where you'd like to be maybe in 10 years' time. And then maybe as we go through each of those, there are a few other questions in the chat that I worry we might not get time to answer. So if any of you guys can have a type in the chat to answer some questions, we would all super appreciate that too. But in the meantime, where do you see yourself in say 5-10 years time, Kristy, and what species do you think?
So I would like to think that I'm still working in research or conservation. hopefully still on British carnivores, and hopefully in that amount of time, well, hopefully in my opinion, I'll take the plunge and say it, maybe species like lynx, possibly. Yeah, so yeah, still around, still working with carnivores, hopefully, maybe bigger ones, but we'll see.
Holly.
I'd still love to be working in sort of conservation. I'd love to continue work with otters to keep increasing their numbers and help stop sort of pollution. I do see myself going back in sort of pollution mitigation and things like that. If I was to work with another species, I'd definitely like to work with foxes, just because love foxes. And I think again another apex predator that could tell us a lot about terrestrial potential pollution. So yeah.
Thank you. And Rachel?
Yeah, I think I would still like to stay in conservation. I think I would be really interested in moving more into the policy side, so more into government, just to kind of see how the research that you put out there is actually received and how that's worked with. It'd be quite interesting to be on the other side of that, and you know, I think getting into that side of it a bit more. And I think now that we've talked about wolves, I think I'm quite keen on wolves, so maybe that's what I'd go for my next species.
Jothan is inspiring everyone here. Beth?
Also working on wolves, right? Yeah, I'm hoping to stay sort of that natural academic career progression. So I'm a postdoctoral researcher now. Hopefully we'll get the next postdoc after this, eventually move through to fellowships and like continue doing research. Just a little plug here, I guess, as well, because I do currently work at the Zoological Society of London. So I do research, but there is like for me, there's a sweet spot between academia and like NGOs, and places like ZSL are it. So I love being here because I'm not tied specifically to a university with lots of like very rigorous university level academic stuff, but I'm still doing lots of cool research with lots of cool researchers around. So staying in an organization like this and continuing that would be cool. And yeah, just working in endangered species recovery in general, and wildlife monitoring. That's where my heart lies.
That's fantastic. Thank you. We've got a few more questions coming in the chat, so maybe we'll start to kind of sum up, and then maybe we'll all spend a little bit of time addressing the questions in the chat. So thank you so much to the audience for getting involved and sending us those questions. So we'll get stuck in with those, and they'll be there in the next few minutes. But first of all, thank you so much to our panelists for sharing your experiences with us. So Kristy and Holly and Rachel and Beth, big thank you. We really appreciate it, and it's just so exciting to hear all the amazing research you do. And even though the fact that you are doing quite different projects, to see all the similarities that are coming through. So especially I think with these big multidisciplinary projects, kind of these long-term monitoring, working a lot with people is very important. Doing a lot of data analysis is very important. And I think hopefully for the audience, it's really kind of reassuring to see the meandering nature of your journeys as well, and just kind of that encouragement to go with what you like, to be enthusiastic, to be passionate, and to kind of say yes and give everything a go. So hopefully it's been, I mean, I've been really inspired by it, so I hope the audience has been really inspired. But thank you so much to you guys, and best of luck with your careers. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Shall we type answers to some of the Q&A stuff? Was that?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I might, I don't know if Ross is still here, but yeah, maybe I'll do some too. I'll help.
Gosh, sorry, my camera flap was down. Yeah, I think we will have access to the Q&A when we end the webinar. So what we could do is I'll send the questions back around to everyone, and then we've got the list of attendees as well, so we can send anything extra out alongside the recording too. So yes, that is unfortunately all we have time for. So thanks everyone for attending. If you'd like any more information on Mammal Society things, Mammal Week, please do have a look at our website and the and follow social media channels, etc. And yes, thanks very much to Robin for hosting and all of our panelists. It's been great. And there we go. Good evening.
Thank you.